Hello.
Hello.
Hi guys. Today is May 25th, which makes it day 66 of lockdown. I'm in a slightly better state today. Not crying. That's good. It's an improvement. On the old mental health front, still a bit fragile, if I'm honest. Sort of been a bit up and down. Felt quite a lot better this morning, and then sort of gone back and forth a little bit, mood-wise, but it's better than yesterday, so that's all good. I guess we just pick up on yesterday's main story, really, which is the old
yesterday's top story.
Yeah, top story, which is the old Dominic Cummings situation, which has developed today in a sort of predictable but slightly baffling manner. He actually did a direct address to the nation himself, further proving that he's actually the fucking prime minister, really. But because that's genuinely unprecedented. Generally speaking, the rule is if one of the advisors becomes the story, they stop being the advisor. But no, he's dug his little heels in, established he doesn't think he's done anything wrong. He's not going to resign,
and this not only is this unelected character allowed to do a press conference, he's allowed to do it from the Garden of Downing Street.
Yep. It was a bit fucking ridiculous, really. There's so many, basically he did a very long waffling version of events, sort of trying to do a blow by blow of what he did when and what his thinking was at that point and why he did these things. But some gaping holes in the story, as it is, and they have had 3 days to come up with it. So, bit bizarre. One of the first things that was a huge sort of gaping error in the story is, in his own account, his wife became quite ill quite suddenly.
Was suspected COVID-19.
So he that famous shot of him running away from Downing Street, which got used quite a lot. Was him running home because she'd called him to say that she actually feels like she's going to pass out and she's the only one looking after their son. So, and fair enough, if that's true, understandably, he rushed home. She was very ill. He sort of made sure she was okay. She was actually feeling a bit better. So he went back to work.
Yes, with her encouragement. Now,
that's already breaking the rules.
He said she was worried she might have COVID-19.
Yep.
And then, my understanding was, you don't have to be diagnosed with COVID-19.
No. It was just, if anyone in your house has symptoms, immediately self-isolate.
Any of the various potential symptoms, you kind of self-isolate. The person with the symptoms has to self-isolate for 7 days, and anyone in the house
has to self-isolate for 14 in case they later develop symptoms.
So very early on in this whole lockdown thing, Ellie got a kind of mild
had a bit of a cough, a bit of a tight chest, but mainly it was just sort of feeling a bit rough,
we
bit
think
coldy.
It was nothing serious.
I think it was just a cold.
But just to be super precautious and super sensible and follow all the guidelines and the rules, Ellie stayed in the house for a week. Didn't go out much after that either, to be honest.
No, I think I went to the shop maybe twice in the following week.
I maintained that isolation for 14 days. We didn't go to Ellie went a couple of times to shops in the second week.
And I'll say for the record, that's because we don't drive. We can't go and stock up a car and just do one big shop. We've only got local shops to go from, and unfortunately, with my limited abilities to carry heavy stuff, I had to make 2 trips.
But we did, for the most part, get by on what we had in the house. I wasn't going out places. By the end of the fortnight, I was going a bit stir crazy, but that's fine, right? We get it. Many people are in much worse situations, and we did the best we could to kind of follow all the guidelines, all the rules, because those are the rules.
Yep.
But he went home to a sick wife who was, by all
very
accounts,
ill,
much
by the sounds of it.
Yeah,
she sounded well. If she's ill enough to call him home from work, and he's one of the most important people in the country, don't you know? You'd think that she must have been really quite ill.
He immediately that afternoon went back to work, potentially spreading the infection to all his important government colleagues.
Yes. And he admitted that in his story and just sort of forgot that that's entirely against the rules.
That was just his introductory spiel to how he was defending the rest of his behaviour. So then,
at the end of the day, he went home and then sort of had this crisis talk with his wife about what do we do if I get sick now. And so they decided the best possible thing to do is, before he gets sick, drive up to Durham so they can go and self-isolate, because she's already ill, so they can go and self-isolate up in Durham near his family, because they had a couple of members of the family that are in the lowest risk groups of age 17 and 22, I think. So they'd be on hand to babysit if he also got too ill to look after the kid. That was basically the argument there. It was like, go there in case they need childcare. First of all, no mention other than their usual childcare wasn't an option, is what he said.
No one pressed him on that. No one really.
Nobody pressed him on that. What, like, okay, did you not know a single person in London who likes you enough to maybe, or likes your son enough to look after?
Mentioned that he did have family dropping shopping round.
Yeah.
When they were back in London.
Yeah. So why couldn't they look after the kid?
And they didn't.
And they didn't need anyone to look after the kid.
No, it was just supposed to be like an option. Like, so all they needed was to have someone on standby who would come and get the kid
if they were too ill to look after him. And his old waffle with that was, oh, well, we didn't want to put anyone at risk of catching COVID when we thought we probably had COVID.
Just their nieces.
So my nieces, that's fine, that's cannon fodder. But his argument there was because they're in the lowest risk group. But what about the fact that you've taken the virus across the fucking country? He claims it's a 4.5 to 5 hour drive, probably about 4.5 hours with current traffic, I would say. It's probably going to be a shorter drive than normal, but still 260 odd miles, so it's a long drive even with no traffic. Claims that he didn't stop anywhere on the way. He happened to have a full tank of petrol. And didn't stop anywhere on the way with his 4-year-old son. I call bullshit. I think they've said that because they've worked out that there's nobody who can prove otherwise. So that's seems to be what they've done, is they've meticulously gone through his timeline, all of the stuff that's already been accused that they know there's proof of. They've kind of gone, right, okay, well, we'll find an excuse for that. But nobody said that they saw him on the way up, so they think, right, well, we'll just say that we didn't stop on the way up. But I call bullshit on that. Anyone who's ever been in a car with a kid under 5 knows that as soon as you leave the house, it's going to be, I need the toilet, which, interestingly, will come back up later in his story. Because later in his story, on the old 30-minute drive away from his parents' house, which I'll come to why that's bonkers, but they did have to stop to let the little one have a pee on a 30-minute drive, which they did in the bushes at the side of the road, so as not to sort of... Because actually, if he'd said we pulled over into services but we didn't go in, we just let him have a pee behind the bushes so that he could have a wee, I'd be more inclined to believe that. They go, no, it's too much of a risk to go into the service station, so we pulled into the far bit of a services car park and let him have a pee in the bushes. I would believe that.
How long of a drive is it?
4.5 hours minimum.
I'm going to want to stop for a wee.
I'm going to want to wee in 4.5 hours.
Let's just not have a go at the 4-year-olds.
No, I know. But, like, yeah, it's bullshit anyway. But, like, it's lying when you don't need to be lying, but actually just sort of, it makes the rest of the story implausible. But so we went up there, allegedly then, stayed in a spare house that his parents have. That's nice. That's handy that he's got a spare house that they can put him up in on their land. Claims he never came close to his family. He had shouted conversations at a distance, but when they never entered their house, they never entered the house he was in, etc., etc. And he never left the property, but he did go for a walk in woodland that is on his dad's property and was spotted there. Claims that's okay because it's private land, but I do wonder if it's a public right of way if other people saw him in those woods. It's not a fenced off woods that is private.
I wonder how many people would give their right arm for a shouted conversation from a distance with a loved one that they've not been able to see or visit.
Yeah, and actually that could be equally, using your discretion, if you think, say, that member of your family is isolating on their own and their mental health is really suffering for it, you could say, well, I was worried about their welfare, so for their mental health, I took that drive across country, shorter drive probably, just to have a shouted conversation with them through their window, which we've been told we can't do. So going halfway across the country in case you need childcare is bullshit. So all the way through this, he basically claims he doesn't think that he did anything wrong. What he did was within regulations, which you've got to be being very, very bending of the rules to find it out. Like, I can see that maybe because the rules don't go into what counts as an extenuating circumstance, you can maybe try to argue it, but I call bullshit. Because there's lots of other people who have put up with much more difficult extenuating circumstances where they have both been ill or it's been a single parent, which, by the way, somebody asked him a question about single parents and then he responded with, well, single mothers, because there's no such thing as a single dad in Dominic Cummings' life, as of the Jacob Rees-Mogg school of parenting, I imagine. So, yeah, just, well, dads don't change nappies. Dads don't do any of that. But, yeah, so that's, it's all ridiculous and bullshit, and there's so many holes in the story already. So then allegedly they spent their 14 days up there mandatory, and he was in a hurry to get back to London, and he was told, medically advised, that he was okay to go back to work, and because his wife had done her 14 days stint as well, they were like, right, well, we're going to go back to London, but my eyesight's a bit dodgy and I'm a bit nervous about driving all that way when I can't see properly. So I know what I'll do. On my wife's birthday, which he failed to mention, it was his wife's birthday, they popped in the car with his son, because that's what I do. If I'm worried about my ability to drive, I certainly make sure to put a 4-year-old child in the back of the car with me.
In the back. That's full safety.
And popped in the car about a 30-minute drive away from his parents' house to a popular beauty spot, which is Barnard Castle?
Yeah.
Barnard Castle. Didn't go in the castle though, and didn't walk around the town, just sort of had parked near a river, sat outside for a bit because he wasn't feeling very well, and then got back in the car, went back to his parents, and then the next day they packed up the car and drove to London.
They did stop in the woods.
Oh, they did stop in the woods on the way back because little one needed a pee.
And then they had a play in the woods.
Yeah. These are all the places where he knows he's been spotted, so he's come up with a tenuous story that links them all. But, okay,
to be fair,
if
though,
that
Ellie,
story... Yeah.
To be fair, that we all know the advice, don't we? Like, if you're in the pub and you have a drink and you think, oh, I'm not sure if I'm safe to drive home, we all know the advice is drive to your nearest castle first, and if that goes okay, you're probably safe to do the rest of the trip home.
Yeah, that is fair. That is common sense, isn't it? That's how we all behave.
We all know that.
Ideally, in that circumstance as well, get a minor to be in the car with you, just to witness that you were checking that you were okay to drive.
The reason he said he was doing this, the reason he had to drive back to London, when he was still not feeling well and still worrying about the trouble with his vision, is that he reckoned he'd been advised by doctors he was okay to return to work.
Yeah.
Now, why in this modern communication age a government advisor can't read up on some information and, send emails and do Zoom chats and all the other things that people are kind of figuring out and having to do right now to kind of make compromises.
If you
and make
genuinely
stuff work.
think you might not be well enough to drive, then you shouldn't drive. Across the board, even outside of COVID times, that would be the advice from the DVLA and driving standards, safety standards and all of that, highway code. If in any doubt, for example, if you take medication which says if you feel any side effects, don't drive, just be on the safe side. Any kind of thing that might impair your driving, don't drive. That's the advice. So he's ignoring common sense because he's so important and he needs to get back to work because he can't do any of this shit over the phone or by video chat or email.
I'd love to know what work it is that he can't do as a government advisor, that what he needs to do in person.
Be Prime Minister. So he decides that he's too important not to go back to work, so he's got to go back to work. So he does a test drive to Barnard Castle. Does decide that he is actually so ill that they need to get out and sit in a beautiful spot on his wife's birthday. So he is ill. So then he drives back to his parents' house, stopping for a piss break, and then decides
didn't go very well. We had to stop twice.
That therefore is proof that I can drive a 5-hour drive to London now.
Well, the other thing I want to know is that doctor who said it was okay for him to go back to work. Did that doctor know that he was having troubles with his vision? And did that doctor know that him returning to work wasn't? Oh yeah, you're safe to, just go back to the office nearby. It involved him driving across the country,
5-hour drive,
driving his wife and child. He'd be the one behind the wheel, because I can't imagine many doctors going, trouble with your vision? Probably get in a car, don't worry about it.
Interestingly, also, this was not. There was, because to be fair, some of the press that did, because he waffled on for ages, and I think emphasised the wrong parts of the story, ignoring where he actually blatantly did break rules. Because first part of the story, he broke the rules because he went back to work after he'd been exposed to a sick person. So that's first. He's already broken the rules anyway. But anyway, ignoring all of that, he waffled on for ages, and then there were a bunch of journalists that were allowed to ask questions. For the most part, I think most of the questions that people had were covered to some extent, but there were glaring ones that weren't, i.e. why couldn't you get someone in London to be on hand to look after your son in case you get poorly? Because then you're not putting someone at risk until you absolutely have to, and you're not risking your own health driving across the country and the health of it. Because what if, okay, you'll be like, it's all right, I had a full tank of gas. What if you break down? What if there's traffic jam and your little one needs a wee, which I'm sure he would have needed a wee on the way there anyway. What if you run out of petrol? What if... There's lots of reasons why...
either of the two of you, who are both apparently...
What if you suddenly feel iller? Yeah. What if suddenly you're feeling, oh my God, actually, I'm feeling faint. I'm going to have to pull over. Yeah, it's basically, that's why we were advised at no point, that's why still in Wales you're not allowed to drive to somewhere to exercise, because if you're driving somewhere and you're not local, there's more risk that you're going to interact with people that you wouldn't have had to interact with, i.e. if you need to fill up your car with petrol, or you break down, or any of those things. If the further your distance you're travelling, the worse it is for increasing your risk that you're going to interact with other people. And he did
say that he did have to fill his tank on the way back.
Yes.
At least he was 95% certain that he
did. He's just sort of assumed, well, I must have probably done it more than once, but I don't know what days or when I did it, so I'll better say that I probably did in case some stories come out proving that I did. But yeah, it just, the whole story doesn't hold water, and it doesn't justify his actions. More galling than that, he wasn't apologetic, basically said, I understand why people might be angry, but they're angry based on false information in the media. Now that I have presented the facts of the situation, hopefully reasonable people will understand where I was coming from, and we can just call that quits. But no, it doesn't hold water. A 260-mile drive, well, obviously over 500 there and back, is not essential. I refuse to believe that there wasn't anybody on hand in London that could have taken over if they were needed. So yeah, that just doesn't hold water. So yeah, the questions. Another thing that is also very, very important and worth mentioning, his wife could drive.
Yeah.
So if he's thinking he might be a little bit ill and he has to go on his little test drive to make sure.
Yeah, why didn't his wife do the driving?
Why did his wife drive?
It doesn't make any sense.
Why didn't his wife drive? I understand why his wife might not have driven up, because she was already feeling ill.
He could have done a test drive to a castle and left the wife and kid
at
home.
Yeah, if you're genuinely doing a test drive, which he wasn't, because that's bullshit, but if you genuinely were, and you were genuinely concerned that you might not be entirely safe, but the world's going to end if you don't get back to work because you are fucking... I was going to say you are fucking the Prime Minister. You're not fucking the Prime Minister. You are the fucking...
So far as we know.
The fucking Prime Minister.
Look, let's be clear. We can't guarantee that Dominic Cummings isn't fucking the Prime Minister.
To be fair,
and I just don't want to say anything that's going to get us sued or or find ourselves in court because we said he wasn't fucking the Prime Minister and it turns out he was.
Right.
And I'm just saying we can't be sure.
We can't be sure.
We don't know.
In fairness, on that accidental
accusation,
I definitely think all evidence suggests that Boris likes the ladies. I think it's safe to say. I'm not sure Dominic Cummings is quite
certainly seems to be true on all the evidence we have available to us. I'm just saying we don't have proof either way as to whether Dominic Cummings is.
So we don't
want
to be. Yeah, we don't want to be.
We don't want to put out anything that is just inaccurate or just or
any
wild
unbased
assumption. It just seems a bit needless, actually, Ellie. So I just wanted to clear that up. I'll tell you what question I really would have loved a journalist to ask him is and they kind of alluded to it, but scientists have come out and said, more people are going to die as a consequence of Dominic Cummings' actions.
Yes, basically because of to explain that's because it's undermined the public health rules, and which means that more people will break the rules or bend them, which means more people will catch COVID and more people will die.
And I'd like to see someone ask Dominic Cummings, how do you feel about being directly, personally responsible for an increase in coronavirus deaths because you put your family ahead of the greater good, having been part of the team that wrote the guidelines asking the rest of us to make sacrifices and put our own personal desires aside to look after everybody.
Bearing in mind that lots of people who self-isolated for less reason, less cause to assume that they might have COVID, myself with a slight sniffles, for example, he knows, like Boris Johnson got a confirmed COVID diagnosis and he'd been working closely with him. So under the track, test, trace strategy, he'd have been told to self-isolate anyway. That does not include driving to fucking Durham. I refuse to believe that there's nobody in his wife's family that could have stepped in if they needed to, even if they were perhaps a little older, or if he could have paid for a taxi from Durham to London for one of his nieces to come and look after the kid if it was required. The government could have afforded that on their chauffeurs, I'm sure, and that wouldn't be putting anyone at risk either.
If they're both so incapacitated that they can't, neither one of them can look after a child, I imagine at that point that's where you're calling hospitals or getting people involved, at which point, there are provisions for that. There are systems in place for if someone calls an ambulance and the kids need.
Of course.
There's systems.
But he wouldn't want his kid to be being looked after by the social services.
But that's
for the proles.
It's just bullshit. And
his child was never in any danger. Also, it was just about convenience and where they'd rather be. Oh, if we're going to hole up, let's go somewhere nice to do it.
Even if
it was never about safety, and anybody who really is banging the drums on his side of things now after that piss weak explanation, have a long hard look in the mirror, mate, because it doesn't hold water, and you've got to really wonder why the fuck you're so keen to just believe these guys. It's bullshit. Boris then, sorry, what were you about to say?
I was just going to say, even if he genuinely feels like he was at the time trying to do the best thing for his family and just kind of doing that and kind of unthinkingly and wasn't deliberately breaking rule or whatever, surely he has to acknowledge that he behaved rashly and with hindsight he made mistakes and that his resignation or sacking would set an example to the British public that his behaviour
not to break the rules in
was
the same way
serious and we should be taking these rules seriously.
Yeah, no, but the fact that he's gone, no, in hindsight I don't regret any of my behaviour. One thing he slightly sort of said was maybe I should have told the Prime Minister, maybe I should have been a bit more transparent about what I did do a couple of days ago when this all came to fruition. He sort of did suggest a certain amount of, perhaps I would have done that differently. But the actual actions that he took after the illness sort of set in and going to Durham and all of his actions up there in Durham and on the way to Durham and on the way back and all of that, he didn't regret any of them. And essentially when sort of somebody asked basically that question of, well, do you not think that this has risked the public safety message? And he basically sort of said, well, whether it comes to whether I stay in my job, that's up to Boris, that's up to the Prime Minister to decide, but I can justify my actions, and I think anybody reasonable would be on my side, basically. So then that leads to the old daily press conference, because this was an extra press conference. This wasn't the one behind the podiums where they have daily sort of updates on everything that's going on. Boris did today's, bless him, I think it's the third one he's done. It might be the fourth. So he did do today's, and not surprisingly, none of the actual bulk of the actual stuff that they came to talk mentioned any of this, but delightfully, all of the questions from all of the journalists were related, at least in part, or pretty much all of them, to Dominic Cummings. One of the other announcements they made was that as of the 1st of June, as well as schools opening, which they're ploughing ahead with, open air markets and cars, warehouses with outdoor forecourts can open. And then on the 15th of June, other retailers can open as long as they use similar social distancing methods as we've seen in supermarkets and pharmacies, etc., etc. So that was really the announcement that they had in today's, and then they went over the data. Today's death rate is actually the lowest we've had in a long time, is 120, which is obviously still a huge number. But when you look at sort of a few weeks ago, we were having them in the sort of 800s and 900s. Obviously, that means it is coming in the right direction, and that's all very good. But not if we're just heading towards a second wave, which I have to assume that some of this reckless behaviour is going to lead towards. This has really massively undermined. It's basically told everybody, do what you fucking like. But yeah, Boris didn't really. So when everybody was asking questions about what do you think about Dominic Cummings and what do you think about this, he deflected as much as he possibly could. So just kind of said, well, you've just had a long chance to discuss this with him. He's spoken from his point of view. I don't think I can add anything to what he's already said. So just deflected. One question was from Beth. I can't remember her surname, but she was in both. She was the really brilliant one who really was not taking any prisoners in her questions to Dominic Cummings. Well, she essentially went in all guns blazing against Boris as well, and I love her for it. I'm not actually sure where she's a journalist from, but she did not pull any punches, and it was beautiful. But she basically said to Boris, is your unwillingness, to sack Dominic Cummings or ask for his resignation really proof that you can't do the job without him?
And what did he say?
Right, I'm just going to reiterate the rules. What we've been saying from the start is the best thing you can do to help is to wash your hands. Like, you just ignored the question and started waffling.
That was his response
oh
to
yeah,
that?
immediately went to the
Jesus.
washing hands thing.
I tell you what, I'd like to, when he was deflecting, I'd like to see someone asking, well...
Oh, well, she piped back up again
Yeah.
and said, and it was interesting because somebody obviously didn't turn her down quick enough, because she sort of piped up again. We're like, no, but you couldn't quite catch what she was saying. But she was saying, the damage you've done to public health, and he went, well, I'll just reiterate what I've said about public health, and the most important thing you should be doing is washing your hands regularly, and he didn't mention anything about that.
That's insane. I mean,
So-
that, to me, is like a resounding yes to her question.
Oh, God, yeah.
Because he clearly isn't capable of even deflecting or
No.
answering that question. And at this point, his go-to message is wash your hands.
Yeah,
That's the message from February. Do you know what I
It's-
mean?
but
We've moved on.
it's-
I mean, yes, we should still be washing our hands if we're out in public, but
that wasn't
we're
really
so
the question.
far past that at this point, and it's
honestly,
I'll tell you the
it's
question.
almost funny.
I'll tell you the question I would have asked him.
Yeah.
I'd have said, well, you're saying Dominic Cummings has said what he has to say. That's him saying you're not. Boris, what he did say, Boris, was whether or not you get the sack,
It's down to you.
It's down to you. So when are you doing that then?
Yeah.
That's what I'd like to ask him.
Considering several Tory MPs, the church, and MPs from all parties and constituents in their thousands have written to their MPs essentially requesting that Dominic Cummings be sacked. Considering that, even if you think perhaps he did the best he could and he acted reasonably, he just misjudged it, but if he just misjudged it, he should still be sacked because it's undermining the public health message. And that in itself is terrifying because it does mean that they are willing to sacrifice the public health message in order to save his skin. And I can't help but wonder why. How is it possible that this man is that important to keep in Downing Street above, undoubtedly, the health of the whole nation? This will lead to extra infections and therefore extra deaths. It could jumpstart a second wave that might overwhelm the NHS. Basically, all of the sort of lockdown measures are being relaxed while this is the backdrop. So everybody's not going to take them as seriously anyway because they think they're easing. And then you've kind of been told, well, even if when this was all going on, it was the 31st of March was when he left London. Well, we hit the peak halfway through his trip in Durham. So this was literally, those 14 days straddled the peak of the virus. I think there's some sort of backwards and forwards on whether the peak was the 9th, 10th or 11th of April, depending on which figures you're going on. But it was around about then. So basically, at the peak of the virus, this is how he was behaving. So now that things are easing, it must be fine to do whatever the fuck we want. Basically, I am baffled that he hasn't sacked him to save his own skin, which makes me think whatever his reasons for not sacking him means that if he did sack him, something worse for his career would be happening, which makes me wonder, what the fuck does Dominic Cummings have on Boris that is worse than the stuff we already know? Like, he's had affairs after affairs. He's left his wife who had cancer for the girl he was banging in the office. Like, we know he's done some terrible things.
Up on policy. And
so what the fuck does this, like, what does this guy have over him?
Ellie.
It's worrying.
Ellie.
But intriguing.
It is Ellie.
Yes.
In the interest of balance.
Yes.
Can I say something in defence of Dominic Cummings?
I would that you wouldn't, but okay.
No, I think it's important in the interest of balance, because I've seen a lot of people since the press conference saying Dominic Cummings hasn't said sorry. Dominic Cummings won't say sorry. Dominic Cummings refuses to say sorry. Dominic Cummings can't say sorry.
Yeah.
Dominic Cummings is afraid to say sorry. And I've seen a lot of that. And what I will say is that when he arrived at 4:30 for his 4 o'clock press conference, he said, "Sorry, I'm late." And then later on, he got one of the names of the journalists wrong, and he says, "Oh, sorry." So I think it's very clear that Dominic Cummings is perfectly willing to say sorry. He's happy to say sorry. He will say sorry when he deems it appropriate. He hasn't said sorry for all breaking the lockdown things because he has no remorse for any of the bad things he's done.
No.
And I think it's only fair in the interest of balance that we include that.
I'm glad you clarified,
yeah.
So I think that's basically where we should leave it. So, because we're at 31 mintes as it is.
What I do want to do then is just quickly plug once again my friend Ignacio Lopez, very funny comedian. He is doing a live stand-up show that he has filmed all about lockdown.
It isn't actually live, is it?
No, it was pre-recorded, but it's being broadcast as live. You'll only be able to watch it at 8:30 this Wednesday.
On Facebook, if you go Facebook.com/Comedy Lopez, you will find it. So it goes out at 8:30. It's his lockdown special.
It's going to be really funny. It's going to be all
it will
new
be
material.
Really good. And yeah, I didn't realise
it.
that you're not going to be able to watch it after. It's not going to be available afterwards. So
it's
watch it while you can.
Exactly,
I guarantee
that's
it will
on
be
Wednesday night.
really
So
good.
this, by the time, this is probably our last chance to properly plug it. And I wanted to plug that because I think it's going to be really good. I also slightly amuses me to be like, what, we've done half an hour of political opinion analysis,
Watch
and
this
then
show.
a plug for a comedy. What is this show? What is the structure of this? What's going on?
We don't have structure.
So
don't be daft.
that just amuses me. Like if you watch the 9 o'clock news and then afterwards they were like, "Oh, Michael McIntyre's Comedy Roadshow." Check that out.
It's just a nice little happy and finally.
Yes.
And finally, don't forget this
finally,
Wednesday.
Yeah.
So yeah, you catch that if you can. I guarantee it will be worth a watch. His stuff is always top
I'm not
quality.
exactly sure when it's actually been filmed or if he's still filming bits. I don't know if he's hastily rewriting things based on current
Well, I
events.
hope he's not doing anything too topical, because you can't sort of say something one day and it still be correct the next day at the moment.
The news keeps moving, as we've found when we've been trying to film stuff.
Yeah, Jesus.
God.
So yeah, we're going to call it a day there, guys. Didn't go into much of our sort of real life stuff going on there, but we did do real world stuff. Hopefully tomorrow it won't be...
We did do real world stuff.
Real world, not real life, our real lives. And then we did do real world.
We did stuff. I thought you were like sounded really defensive. Like
No.
we didn't go into much about our real life, but we have got lives. We've been doing stuff.
No, well, sometimes we don't talk about the real world at all. Today we didn't talk about us much.
No.
But hopefully tomorrow won't be all about Dominic Cummings. But you never know, maybe he'll be sacked, and then we will want to talk about that. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think this is going to be a long, slow, drawn-out process, and he is going to drag a lot of people down with him before he goes. But he is going because everybody fucking hates him. So let's just hope that he takes down some other dickheads on the way down. Shall we?
Yeah.
So we're going to call it a day there, guys. So don't forget, like and subscribe, but there's no shame in it.
No shame in it.